All right, guys. I wanted to just give us a first a little heads up about a thing that I posted on the left hand side. So you should be familiar with this left hand side of the screen. I know that sometimes it gets maybe confusing and I don't know. People have told me in the past that they don't notice when things get posted over here. So I do my best to make sure that if anything does get posted, that I'm telling you about it. Um, I posted my paper specification requirements. This is something that I talked about in the syllabus video and the welcome video, but now we have just a space where you have those precise requirements that all of your submissions should follow, right? And this should really be a refresher. I'm not asking for anything that I'm sure previous instructors haven't asked for. Um, this is pretty standard stuff for an English class, especially. But I am going to insist upon it. I don't need to go through it again, but that is there for you. And know that if you submit it improperly, I'm just going to initially I'm going to give it a 0 and allow you to turn it back in. After a while, I'm just going to deduct points, okay, until the message is received. Right? So if you submitted something improperly, the proposal this week or the Wiki Collab report, you might see that you get a 0, and in the comments section, I'm telling you to resubmit it. Once you resubmit it properly this time around, I will go back and give you the credit and give you some feedback on whatever it is that you're submitting. Okay, so please do follow this. I am going to be a stickler about it. This week we are, this video. I just went over the Wiki project stuff, the collab report, and the proposal in the previous video. This video is going to be something that you'll consult likely this week if you get done with all the other stuff. But I'm anticipating that a majority of us are probably not really going to watch this until next week, when the focus will be on doing the annotated bibliography and starting the process of gathering secondary research for your semester project. So I promise to be real quick with the turnaround, giving feedback on project proposals, since I know then a week after you submit your project proposal, you're being asked to do an annotated bibliography, and you need my thumbs up to move forward with the project. I anticipate that a lot of you are fairly confident that you're going to get the thumbs up from me, so of course you don't have to wait unless you're really unsure as to whether or not it's a topic that I'm going to approve of. In that case, maybe it's worth reaching out to me, emailing me. Which again, by the way, as a reminder, you should be using those Gmails, those student Gmail accounts, not D2L. Okay, I know that D2L has a function here, and I will respond to people on here. But again, like I said in the welcome video, I am insisting that you use your Oakton Gmail. Your Oakton Gmail is how I reach out to you. I've already reached out to everyone in the class to talk about, or at least to introduce you to your group members this past week for the Wiki project. So just keep that in mind. That really is, there shouldn't be any confusion about that. That is something that I said in the first video. Follow the email trail and go to your Gmail accounts. Okay, so this video is dedicated towards secondary research, starting that conversation. Before we can even really begin discussing secondary research and what I'm asking of you with this annotated bibliography, we need to establish kind of just a common understanding of what constitutes a credible source for a paper like this, which is a research paper in which essentially you are entering into a scholarly space, right? That space being true academic writing. That's what you're producing this semester, is academic scholarship, okay? And we need to be on the same page about sources that are usable and how you can use those sources for a project like this, and ones that we're going to want to stay away from, ones we'll want to avoid. So this will be a two-part conversation. I'm not going to get through everything in this video. The second part will be posted next week as we continue discussing secondary research. And next week you'll be tasked with a little exercise in evaluating source credibility. That'll be a part of next week's grade. So anticipate that, but right now in this video we're going to establish a little grading criteria, a little grading rubric with 5 different criterion that can be used to measure any source against another. Doesn't matter where it came from, we can use these 5 criterion to measure it. This process of evaluation, I always like to start with this. This process of evaluation is something that we do pretty consistently throughout our lives, whether we're aware of it or not. More often than not, it is a subconscious thing or something that we're not thinking so critically, or in such an organized way where we're putting those criteria into like a rubric to reference and then measure one against another. A lot of this stuff we just do second nature. So you're buying a pair of sneakers. What goes into that? What are some criteria? Well, maybe I'm looking for comfort. Maybe I'm looking for performance. Maybe I'm looking for style, how cool it is. Maybe I'm looking for hype. Maybe it is a brand thing. I want the brand name and its logo to be on my feet. Those are different criteria that maybe you've thought about that before, but the majority of us haven't really spent too much time thinking metacognitively about how we're choosing, how we're deciding which shoes to buy when we're buying a new pair of sneakers. Same thing goes for on a weekly, if not a daily basis, when you're deciding what you want to eat, where you want to go in and get dinner from, right? Or get lunch, get breakfast. You churn the same thing through a little process, right? Imagine you are getting food and you're trying to come up with the grading criteria. The first most obvious one, of course, is the food itself. And within the food, we could talk about, the food's temperature, how well seasoned it is. Is it fresh food? Is it using safe ingredients? If you care about this, is health going into it at all? How well it's accommodating your allergens, if you're allergic to stuff. Food, right? That's one criteria. Another thing that's helping us decide where we want to go and eat is the price point, right? So that, imagine like a little scatter plot, on the X and Y axis, and on that X axis is price, and then on the Y axis is like quality of the food. Sure, we're willing to sacrifice a fully, realized feast if it means that we can pay less, but at the same time, the other end of that is we'll sacrifice, an expensive bill. We'll pay that expensive bill if we know that we're going to go to a restaurant that's really fancy and it's going to be this whole, the food is going to be fantastic. It's going to be this whole experience. Another thing we could throw in there, just to round out a total of 5, we could say the location of the place in relation to where we are. What's the first thing when you go and search what food to eat on Google? You look at food near me. And so if you're looking for convenience, then that location plays into that. Do they have a drive-through? Do they have curbside pickup? Can they do delivery? Or if it's a different sort of scenario, am I trying to go out to eat? Am I going to go and sit down someplace? If you are in that mood, you're likely not going to go and sit down at a McDonald's or a Wendy's, right? You're going to want more of an experience. And then experience, I guess, ambiance of the place itself could be a 4th category. So for those times that we are attending that place, what are the things we look for with ambiance? Seating, do they have enough seating for me? I can't stand restaurants that are like really crowded and you're on top of one another. In some places, you share a bench and you're elbow to elbow with the next tables over. Can't stand that. Not my kind of spot. Of course, we look for cleanliness of the place at any restaurant we would go to. That's a bare minimum. Is there music playing? Is there, this how is it contributing to the overall experience of being in the physical setting? And then the last one coupled with that would be the service, right? The wait staff, are they polite? As long as we are reciprocating that politeness, I hope. Um, you would anticipate that the people that work at McDonald's drive-through are not going to be giving you 5-star quality service, and that's okay, right? That's not what we expect from them. Whereas if we are going out to a nice restaurant and we're anticipating leaving a good tip for the wait staff, then we want them to be attentive. We want them to serve our food when it's still warm in a timely fashion and accommodate everything that we're asking, right? So 5 different categories just for deciding where we want to eat. And that's typically how we would do this exercise if we were in person in the classroom. But now applying that to research, applying that to the secondary sources you're going to be gathering for your semester project. Well, you're going to gather those in this space, in annotated bibliography. And so one element of completing your annotated bibliography is going to be addressing each of these 5 criteria for your sources. So the 5 criteria that I insist we use, it starts with author, right? That's an obvious one. Who's writing the piece? If it's a reliable, credible person, then we know that it lends itself better to a research project. There is a spectrum to this. We see that I've done a 6-point scale. So this is my attempt to help us understand how we can break down separate categories of author, separate categories of going to the next one of publisher, right? So we think about this as of course, in the traditional sense, a publication is something like a newspaper, a magazine, a book, right? A physical copy of something. In our digital world, that has changed entirely. So the publisher, in most cases, now online, the publisher is the website. Who owns the website? Newspapers still have websites. You can still access scholarly materials online, digitally. But thinking then also about the publisher as just the container, like the host of that information, that's where social media comes into play. Because we wouldn't necessarily think about like Twitter or TikTok as traditional publications, as publishers, but yet they're still containing the information. They are serving as the platform. Maybe platform is a good word instead of just container. But researchers refer to it as container. That's how scholars refer to that next category. The sources that are being used is another essential one. So yes, we're finding our sources, but then those sources, where are they getting their information from? Next would be timeliness. We always want to be as timely as possible. We ideally are getting things that are recently published rather than stuff that's old, unusable information. And then finally, kind of a tricky one is bias. That's a 5th one. It's one that we easily come up with in conversation. In my 101 class today, we were just discussing this. If you took my 101 class, it was that conversation about information outlets and where we get our information. And, it led to a really good conversation about the differences between kind of traditional news media and social media and how bias plays a role in both cases, and that naturally is something that is a way in which we measure one source against another. So let's dig into this, right? What exactly are we going to be looking for across our various sources with regards to each criterion? So an author, what are the things that we use to measure the effectiveness of an author in order for it to score a 6 out of 6, right? That's the highest possible score. We start first with education. Since we are working in an academic space, we are trying to produce what's known as scholarship or scholarly work, assuming the role of a scholar, which is quite simply someone who researches, someone who reads, who researches, who conducts studies of their own and then writes about it, a specific field, who commits themselves then to that specific field for their career. Scholarship and scholars are hyper focused. Hyper focused. You're not going to get general scholars. The same way, and I'll explain this here in a moment. The same way, like a journalist. The reason why that's a tier lower in the 5 category. Journalists, essential. Journalists, still absolutely important for our society, and in a lot of ways, the most reliable mainstream sources of information for the lay person, right? The common person. But we also recognize that the lay person, the common audience member, is not an academic typically. They're not in academic spaces. More often than not, they haven't even been introduced to academic spaces. They don't have the education. They don't have this experience of going to school, going to college, and discussing these things. So therefore, they don't need to consult the same level of credibility that we are doing in this context. Now, I'm not telling you that like all of your information for the rest of your life, as you hopefully continue throughout college and maybe assume the career of an academic, all of your information needs to come from scholarly sources or academic publications. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm instead saying is, in this writing situation, in this writing context in which we are composing a research paper, there is this expectation that your research paper should be drawing upon the scholarly conversations that are happening in that field related to that topic. What the other professional researchers are studying and contributing to that conversation. That way, you yourself can know what the major voices are saying, and you can position yourself as, this is how my paper, my ideas, my arguments are original contributions to the field. That's our goal. And that sounds lofty. I understand. That's not what you're expecting, writing this research paper. That's not how the majority of you, if any of you, are approaching this project, and that's okay. But I also, in all of my classes, and I've said this, you've heard me say this before, if you've taken my 101, that I always ask you to kind of abandon the most immediate reality when you're doing the projects for this class. The most immediate reality being, you're a student, I'm a teacher, I'm asking you to do this, you're doing it because it's going to get you the grade that you need to pass the class. But if you abandon that reality and then accept this manufactured reality that I'm proposing, which is assume the role of a scholar, assume the role of a researcher in a professional capacity who is conducting a study that they then want to share with other researchers in that field, your work is just going to be all the better for it. Okay, so I'm losing my train of thought, but the point is that for our purposes, to score a 6, we need A, education, which in our cases means PhD. All scholars have a PhD. That's the terminal degree in their respective field. They're not a jack of all trades. They're not getting like, I've got a BA in marketing and a BA in journalism and a BA in psychology. Well, jack of all trades, master of none. We're looking at those that have mastered the craft, that have mastered, the study. And it's those folks that have taken it, okay, I've got my bachelor's in English, now I'm going to take it to the next level. I'm going to get my master's degree. And in my master's degree, I'm going to study rhetoric and composition. And then from there, I'm going to apply to PhD programs. I'm going to get into a PhD program, and I'm going to focus on this specific element of rhetoric and composition, right? It just continues to get more and more hyper-focused. The work gets more intensive. And the reality is, if you get that degree, you are achieving a certain level of credibility. It says something about your resume. It says something about your resume. And so those are the folks that we are looking for as the best of the best. Now, I'll talk about the requirements for the assignment and for the paper here in a little bit. Not every one of your sources needs to come from this place. Not every one of your sources needs to be one of these scholars, but I am going to insist that some of them are. The next thing that we look for would be experience, right? Maybe you don't have the full education in the field, but you do have the experience, right? These are more so the general criteria. If it was scoring a 6, then yeah, you would have both. In addition to a history of publication, right? You've published in other academic contexts, you've written books. And then, I think that it's good just to recall a 101 principle of ethos, right? Which means, of course, in an English translation from the original Greek, credibility. And so hopefully your teachers talked about this in your previous 101 class. But yeah, ethos, it means credibility. It also relates to character, reliability, being honest. Are you someone that's trustworthy? So that trustworthiness, that goes into all of these categories. I bring the ethos to talk about the author, but I mean ethos applies to every publication. Bias, right? Are you being honest about your bias? So then the authors, the specific authors that should score 6 are scholars, professors, doctors, scientists who are writing academically, who are publishing studies, who are publishing academic work. We'll talk about what that means specifically here in a moment, but that's what scores the best, the 6 out of 6. To get a 5 out of 6, in my mind, it's then a rung lower, but journalists, right? So those newspaper journalists, and I think it's important to sort of separate the two. I would absolutely say that newspaper journalists and those maybe writing for something like, a publication like The Atlantic, which is, a magazine of criticism, but still carries with it journalistic principles in the writing and research. That's different from what you'll see from your local TV news reporters. And part of that has to do with the publication itself. Part of that has to do with it's coming from local TV news rather than one of these, newspapers, which, whether you read them or not, the fact remains that there's a reason why they're failing, right? There's a reason why, and that's because they're not pandering to the masses. They're not pandering to the vapid tendencies of the general public to just be interested in celebrity culture, or the eye-widening local nightly news that moved by the maxim, if it bleeds, it leads. And the first story of every night is some crime that's been committed, some awful tragedy that's happened to somebody. I'm not saying that those are false reports. I'm not saying that those are lies that they're telling you, but understand that there is, an agenda that is dictated by viewership, that's dictated by their ratings, ABC7, NBC5, CBS. What dictates their moves is what they think is going to get them the most viewership. Not that newspapers don't run the same way, but newspapers are to a fault sticking to that journalistic integrity where, readers be damned, they're going to do the work. They're going to put that work in, and they're publishing, long-form studies typically. Think about local TV shows. Local TV shows, they hear about something that happens, and they're there. They're ambulance chasers. They have the eye in the sky that's going around the choppers that are going, and they're not just looking at traffic, right? They're trying to see, oh shit, is there a crash over here? What happened here? Oh, there's some police activity here. Let's send our team over there right now. And if this is happening right now at 3:58, and the news is on in a few minutes, how much information are you really going to get from that news report? How reliable is that going to be when they have such a quick turnaround? Have they really done their work? So that's the difference that I'm putting in here, and I want us to understand that. And that's different even from a third. I would put like these 24-hour news cycles stations. You know the ones I'm talking about. I would put those even lesser, right? Because they really are just, that's talking head. That's entertainment, right? We're getting into like entertainment. Not that they can't be reporting facts and such, but there are just simply better organizations that we could utilize in our research to get that information from. Yeah. So be skeptical about this, right? I don't mean to sound like a cynic, but allow that skepticism. Healthy skepticism is a part of being a scholar. It's a part of being a researcher. It's a part of being a critical thinker, okay? So allow that into your evaluation of your sources. Other ones that would count, as we'll talk about, representatives of like federal agencies, of some sort of official capacity. I hold this position. I'm the director of whatever at the Institute of National Institute of you name it. I can't think of anything right now. It's Tuesday and I'm already burnt. But yes, if it carries some sort of a title, and this is getting in now to our next category, that of publisher, but if it carries some sort of a title, and we understand that the publisher is not going to allow just any old dipshit to post and say whatever they want on their website, on their TV show, then that's where this dynamic of author and publisher comes into play. So if we are on like some sort of official federal website, some agency, if we're pulling from a government website, then ideally, we would think that we'd be able to trust in its sticking to the facts, right? What's scoring a 1? Things that are anonymous posters on social media, known morons, that's what's scoring a 1. And then 2 and 3 somewhere in between. Okay, then moving on to publisher, right? As I said, I keep talking about these scholarly journals or these academic articles. The academic articles are what are contained in the scholarly journals. These are used interchangeably, right? Scholarly journals, academic journals. Academic articles, scholarly articles. Interchangeable words, okay? And I'll go back and forth throughout the semester. We're going to demonstrate here in a moment how to find this kind of research. And for your project, for your final project, I'm going to ask that half of your sources, half of your 10 total secondary sources for your final paper are scholarly sources. For this assignment, your annotated bibliography, you're finding 6 of those sources total, and 3 of them should be scholarly. 3 of them should be scholarly. All right, I'll make that clear several times so there's no confusion about that. 3 should be scholarly sources. Now, why are these scholarly sources better than newspapers? Why are they better than the TV news? Why are they better than social media? Let's talk about it. There are very clear reasons. The first is their editorial process. They're what's known as peer-reviewed. So before anything gets published in one of these journals, it is run through a very rigorous process of other academics, other scholars who are somehow involved in or in charge of that publication, who are scrutinizing the work. They're going through, they're deciding whether or not this is worthy of publication. They're scrutinizing every word, every thought, every argument, and deciding whether or not it's ready to go. That's quite rigorous compared to something like social media, where I don't need anyone to look at it. I can just post whatever the hell I want on Twitter right now, and no one's going to stop me. People might call me out, right? Which is then the good part. That's what I was alluding to earlier. This is why we had such a rich conversation in my 101 class today. Social media, we have that immediate audience response. And if we're bullshitting, then it's likely that people are going to jump in the comments section and call us out, or even make, other response videos, call us out. It's not so easy in this world, in the academic world, because not only is a long, arduous process of conducting and writing the piece, writing the article, it's a long, arduous process of it getting reviewed and those professionals looking at it and saying whether or not it should be, published in their journal. And then it's a long process before it's even published. Once they give it the okay, it's likely months, sometimes even like a year out for these annual magazines, these annual journals that only publish once a year. So that audience reaction is going to be a lot slower. And we're also seeing maybe kind of like the cons of what this scholarship is. Since it's taking months, if not years, for me to write the piece, and a long time for people to review it, and a long time for the publication to be disseminated out in the public, it's not very front-facing to a mainstream audience. And it's not as timely as like a social media could be, or the local TV news can be. How they can hop on and publish what happened yesterday right now, right, the day afterwards. On social media, we can publish what happened 2 minutes ago right now. I can publish what happened 1 second ago. So you have to understand that you're not going to find scholarship that's talking about what happened last week in your community. It's also, of course, a much smaller sector of authors in our world compared to journalists, compared to local news, and of course compared to any person who has social media and could be, like a citizen journalist and post whatever the hell they want, or post whatever opinion they have. It's a much smaller segment of our world. A much smaller audience too. But the reason, again, why it's so effective, why it's so elite, peer-reviewed by people that know what they're doing, it's double-blind, meaning that they remove, if I'm submitting something, they're going to remove my name from the paper, so there's no risk of like nepotism or, favors being done behind closed doors. Oh, hey, I know Austin, he's a great guy, let's go ahead and publish his stuff as a favor to him. That's not happening, right? We remove any sort of indication that it was written by this person. And there's just a general legacy to it. A lot of these journals, the majority of them, have been publishing for years. It's not a very lucrative business to get into. If you have a dream of starting a publication, a scholarly journal is not like your first thought. I mean, any publication nowadays, like you're probably that's a dying dream. I don't think any of you are really excited to the prospect of starting your own newspaper or starting your own magazine or something. But these are typically legacy, meaning that they've had years, decades of work that have established them as just being recognizable, credible. So that's our scholarship. And the scholarly work is what's going to score a 6. Since we ourselves are trying to be scholars, I am going to insist that your research paper and the bibliography this week, or the coming week, includes scholarly articles. So then what else can we include? This is kind of preempting a conversation that will continue next week, but things that would score lesser is just a general editorial board, like one that you would find on a newspaper or local TV news. They have an editorial board, right? They have people signing off. I can't just like get like the credentials to the New York Times website and post whatever I want right now. It's going through a set of professional eyes. So newspapers, other publications with a history of integrity. I still put TV news below that, right? And then that goes for also any of their respective digital publications. Sometimes people are confused. They think like, oh, well, ABC 7 News also has a website, right? Is that somehow more credible? Not necessarily, right? I think that if it's published on the website, then it's likely that they've allowed a little bit of like a buffer time before the event that was taking place and like the live TV news stream, um, they've probably taken a little more time to like check the facts and interview more people. So you could make the argument it's slightly more credible, but I still put those lower because it's pretty clear in most cases that there is a skew. Okay, there is a lean to a lot of these TV networks because they can get the viewership, and they're going to do then what their fans want them to do. That's going to dictate, what gets shown first, shown the loudest, shown the most often. Then the what's going to score one is anything self-published, right? Now I say this with a caveat, but this is kind of something that we'll get into next week as well. I think absolutely there is there is space for social media and even self-published blogs and others in an academic sense, right? In an academic environment, 100%. I've written papers, that use social media as like one of the main sort of like sources, or that's what it's criticizing, right? And so of course in those cases we need to bring social media into the fold, but I do want us to avoid relying too heavily on social media. And so for our sake, I wouldn't just go about like quoting a tweet by somebody. If it's a tweet from like a professional journalist, well, it's likely then that they've also published in some other more respected, more reviewed capacity, whether that is like through the publication they work for, or even something like a Substack. I know that's popular nowadays where people will, it's essentially the same thing as a blog, but people will sort of like post their Substacks of like articles they've written, but they haven't been, included on like a qualified publisher's like official page. It's kind of just like self-published, my stuff. But I want us to stay away from the self-published stuff here early on. It's a more nuanced conversation. That I'm not one of your teachers that's saying that social media it has no bearing on what we do in an academic research capacity. That's not my message, but for our purposes right now, that is something I want to ask you to stay away from. Sources. So sources, are we being honest? And again, with our academic research, we're going to get that bibliography of sources. At the very end of the paper that we're reading, it is going to include a works cited page. And you'll definitely notice that bibliography is 95%, 99% other scholarly work. Okay. We still get that same process of consulting sources in something like a news report or a journal or a newspaper article, that of like eyewitness testimonials, interviews that were conducted, other consulted websites, other consulted sources that are then cited in the article. Are they citing their work? That's an important thing. We'll put that in there. We need to make sure that there are citations, or just moments where they're revealing where they're getting the information from. If they're being purposefully secretive and they're not telling you, or there are no sources, then that's just kind of like a typical move by someone that is bullshitting. Want to stay away from that. Timeliness, we want it to be as recent as possible. I know I said that with these peer-reviewed ones, you're not going to get stuff that was published yesterday. So we think about timeliness with regards to peer-reviewed scholarly work in a different sort of way than we would a news report. So I want us to understand that. There are different ways to measure it. Something that would be out of date in the scholarly world, well, it really depends maybe on the subject matter. Think about something like mental health, psychology. That's changed so much even in the last like 10, 15, 20 years that if we were to consult some sort of scholarly piece that might have been, gospel at the time it was written 30 years ago. Well, that has changed entirely because there have been new scholarly, there's been new scholarly work done, and new folks that have come out and said, actually, this is untrue. This is the general accepted, truth then of that field. So it's something that changes, but don't not use an article because it was published 5 years ago. At the same time, it really depends on your topic. 6 years ago, some change, we had something that happened in our world that changed it forever, right? We had COVID happen. And if you're looking at something that has been impacted by COVID, again, like mental health, maybe let's say you're exploring college students' mental health. I know for a fact there have been many scholarly conversations about COVID's impact on young people's mental health. And so if you're pulling an article from 2019, 2018, before that happened, then maybe it would be wiser to choose one that has factored in how COVID, plays a role in the lives of our current, generations of people. So we want it to be as recent as possible, but it's not necessarily a bad, we measure it differently depending on the source. Publisher or scholarly would measure it in a couple of years. Newspaper stuff, I would say the more recent the better. Do your best to stay within the last couple of years. If possible, the last couple of months. Again, it depends on the topic, but if you're talking about like the conflict in Iran, then you certainly don't want to like publish or consult like a source from 2024, right? I mean, that's something that's ongoing, happening daily, new updates constantly. So you want that to be as soon as possible, and avoid stuff that's out of date. Then finally, bias. Bias, I know, is kind of a tricky one, because the reality is we all have bias, and there's going to be bias in any source that you consult. The moment an author takes an event, takes a concept, takes a story, takes something that's happened to somebody else, even themselves, the moment they take it and they write about it, we can detect bias. And the reason being, it's becoming secondhand immediately. The only way, right, to avoid total bias of any, perspective in a situation would be like if we ourselves were there, or even though there's a way to manipulate this, and you can make the same argument for this, but, things that are caught on video, things that are recorded, there's more evidence, right? There's less doubt, even though we understand then that is even something that can be manipulated and is oft talked about, that stuff is taken out of context even when it was recorded. You didn't see what happened the moment before the phone started recording. So yeah, bias is a complicated thing. It's not always a bad thing either, right? I'm a huge Cubs fan. That doesn't make me an evil person. Maybe you if you're a Sox fan, we're not going to get along in that regard. But that's a bias that shouldn't affect my teaching. It shouldn't affect my civic responsibility as a person living in this world. So just understand that we're looking for honesty. We're looking for, hey, if there's opinion in this piece, are they being real about it, or are they trying to like operate under this false belief that there is this objective neutrality that an individual can achieve, when in reality that's not true. I know sticking to the facts, right? It's as simple as that. Well, that isn't always a simple thing, because then which facts? And I don't mean like I don't mean like like a post-truth world idea of fact. I mean, which literal tidbits, that the laundry list of things that you are considering facts, you're only going to choose so many of those in the story. So which ones are going to be included and which ones are going to be omitted? And then when you are reporting those facts, you have to paraphrase, you have to put it in your own words, in your own language. What words then are you using to communicate that? I'd argue that when we see a headline, and let's say it's a headline for, the president, regardless of which president it is, Trump, Biden, Obama, Bush, there's a difference between seeing a headline that says the President of the United States of America, da da da, and Trump or Biden or Obama or Bush, da da da, right? Using just the sort of more pejorative last name, the more informal way of referring to them, rather than the president, and including the title in there. It leads your audience to react differently. And I'm not saying that it is always used against then that whoever is in office. I think that sometimes if you just say Trump or Biden or Obama or Bush, then that could be like, well, they're trying to sound like a man of the people, right? They're trying to sound more personable. In other instances, it feels like a jab, to not give them the title. These are just a couple of things to consider, right? And what my sort of purpose in convincing you that bias is ever present in our society, and you're not going to find a source that is like 100% neutral. It just doesn't happen. So instead, what do we look for? We look for honesty. We look for this notion of bias equity, kind of like offering that there are different sides to the argument, starting a dialectic, which of course is just going to make the argument stronger too, right? Because if I say, here's where I stand, here's what I think we should do, here's what somebody else says, but then here's my retort to what they would say. Here's what I would say in response, to their rebuttal of what I have to say. That's just going to make for a better argument, because not only is it more clear and more real about the other differing opinions that are out there, but it builds up your own, because then you can again offer another sort of you can ready your response. So just something to keep in mind. Anything that's going to score less than that, going all the way down to 1, the brazen misuse of info, opinions that are passed off as facts, and rhetorical fallacies. All right. So where do we go from here? Well, let's do this. Let's take a look at our assignment sheet for the bibliography. Now, I know that if you remember my syllabus, and there's a reason why this is written as 2 different things, kind of. In my syllabus, I put as separate assignments the annotated bibliography and this comparative source analysis. Since we're an 8-week course, I've condensed that, I've consolidated it into just 1 assignment. It is just 1 assignment. So that's why it's called Annotated Bibliography, in parentheses, CSA, or Comparative Source Analysis, because it took 2 assignments, it condensed it into 1. For our purposes, I'm just going to call it the Annotated Bibliography. To avoid any confusion, I'm just going to call it the Annotated Bibliography, but you'll see these elements that I've included from the other assignment, from the previous assignment, that I'm going to ask you to include in your Annotated Bibliography. All right, so Annotated Bib, here we go. You've chosen your semester topic. Now it's time to start collecting sources for your research paper, starting with your Annotated Bibliography. Again, final research paper, 10 sources. 10. I'm in a weird corner here. 10 total sources for your final research paper. For this assignment, you're collecting 6 of them. 6 sources for this assignment. An annotated bibliography, what is it? It's a reference page in MLA format that includes what's known as an annotation or a little write-up, right? That's what an annotation is. Annotated means it's just written. It's got little write-ups, little comments. And there, of course, are specific things I'm going to ask you to include in those comments, in that annotation. Starting with a summary of each source, and then assessing the source's relevance to your topic, called the discussion section. In addition to that, the thing that I'm pulling from then, that other assignment called the CSA, or the comparative source analysis, that's where this rubric comes into play. So for each of your sources, each of your 6 sources, you are going to assess the credibility of each of those 5 categories: author, publisher, sources, timeliness, and bias. Okay, so the bib it consists of 6 sources. Your research should present your audience with a clear overview of your topic, should begin to cover the major voices and viewpoints. More spec-related things, as I noted, 3 scholarly sources are what you're finding. So out of your 6, I should find 3 scholarly sources included in that bibliography. Another note, the official Oakton website does not count as one of your 10 sources. It is a source I would expect you to automatically consult and eventually include in your research paper, but it does not count as one of these sources that you're using. Does that make sense? There's a difference between what counts towards one of your 10, the outside secondary research, things that exist outside the context of Oakton College, because it's almost inherent to those of you who are doing a project related to our school. It's almost automatic that you would just be including research from Oakton's website. That's like the first place you'd probably start. So yes, you'll still cite that, but it won't be counted as one of your 6 for this or one of your 10 later on. I know I'll have to repeat that, but just so we understand for the sake of this assignment, don't include the Oakton website. Also, don't include tertiary sources. You're getting done with your Wikipedia projects. You're understanding more the nuances of what a Wikipedia page is and what it is not. It is not a secondary source. We've talked about that previously in the other video. It is a tertiary source. There's no original authorship. The same thing for Encyclopedia Britannica and other similar websites. It's just a tertiary source. Do not include it. If you include it, you're losing points. So this is going to be due Sunday, September 6th. Kind of a quick turnaround with this stuff. I understand, but that's the nature of the beast of an 8-week class, especially a 102 class. That's what you signed up for. So each annotation should be 500 to 600 words. Each annotation. So that means you got 6 total sources. Each one has an annotation. 6 times 5. So somewhere in the ballpark of 3,000 to 3,600 words total. But there are other things included in that, right? Just so we're clear, I'm only referring to the annotations right now. You can find now the suggested word count distribution under source annotations. We see down here I've done that. Before I get to that point, this is the structure that I'm asking you to follow with your paper. So start with an introduction. We always need to begin with an introduction. Everything right underneath that MLA heading needs to be an introduction. So give me an introduction. Next, I want you to discuss this rubric that we just talked about. You can use for reference everything that we just discussed in this conversation, right? This conversation that we just had. But I want you to go into your paper, taking a look at a student sample here, to see exactly what I'm talking about. The rubric discussion should define what each of the 5 criteria are. Okay, so starting first with author. What do we mean by author? Right? How does one score a 6? How does one score a 1? What do we mean by publisher? How does one score a 6? What do we mean by sources? What do we mean by timeliness? What do we mean by bias? You are simply defining your framework. We have to do that since we're offering something like this evaluation rubric, and an audience outside of our classroom doesn't know about this. This isn't a universal evaluation rubric. This isn't published anywhere outside of this class right here. So you have to define those parameters. because this is how you're measuring the credibility of each of your sources. You have to define your framework. So that is what goes after your introduction, just like we see here in the sample paper. So introduction, a little paragraph, then the rubric discussion, where you break down each of the 5 general criteria. You're not talking about any of your sources yet. Don't talk about your sources in this section. You're just literally defining what each of these 5 things are. Then finally, we get to the source annotations. So the source annotation, it starts first with a full, proper MLA citation. I've included this little outline, this annotated bibliography outline. At the very bottom of it, I have a condensed MLA citation helper. Later in the semester, we're going to go through in more rigorous detail MLA style. I've pulled this from a document that's about 2.5, 3 pages longer. But this is what really you just need to know for this. Since we're not doing in-text citations, we're simply doing just the full text, getting in the habit of writing a full text citation. So it starts with that full text citation. Then you're going to summarize the source. Here's what I look for in the summary of a source, an objective summary. Detail the specific points. Choose 3 to 5 actual arguments, literal arguments by the author. What are the points that the author is making? What are they saying? What is their position? What's their stance on the issue? What's their unique contribution to the conversation? Don't tell me you agree with it. Don't tell me that you think it's good for these reasons. These are qualifying words. This is not your opinion in an objective summary. Okay, so to teach this, to understand, how to properly write an objective summary, we need to remove any language that's suggesting this is good or bad, or that you agree or disagree with it. Objective summary, get that language out of there. The next part is the evaluation of the source's credibility. Okay, so as we see here in the sample paper, you're going to go through, right? We have the citation, we have the summary, and then for each of these, you're going to tell me why you think it scores. You're going to tell me, give me a score, give me a number, right? We have a 6-point scale, so include a number, but then tell me why you got to that number. Why does this article score a 2 for an author, and a 3 for a publisher, and a 1 for sources, and a 1 for bias, and a 4 for timeliness? Give me your reasons. Defend your evaluative scores. Be honest with your evaluation. I shouldn't see sources scoring a 30 out of 30 if it's something from the local nightly news. We've just spent the entirety of this video talking about what scores the best possible score in this academic context is only scholarship, only scholarly work. So defend your evaluation, but also defend the research that you found. You're trying to convince me that you found credible sources for your paper. And I've done this before. I'll do this. If you found some bullshit, I'm going to tell you, you can't use that for your final paper. If you found some blog post that's trying to sell you on consulting them for a marketing firm, I'm going to say, find something else. Even if the information is solid, you can find it from a better source. So yeah, you're defending your score, but you're also defending to me why this is something essentially that should be used for your final paper. And then lastly, you're going to end with a discussion of the ways in which this might inform your research. So pull out specifics from the article. Could be data points, it could be quotes that you like, it could be just general what the author's position, and tell me how that ties back to what your argument is. Tell me how that ties back to what your position is, what you're arguing for. Okay, always end with a conclusion, wrap up with some final thoughts, final statements. What's the future outlook? What else do you need to find to supplement your current secondary sources for this paper? And then that's the paper. Okay. We have grading criteria right here. I have also indicated to check out the Annotated Bibliography outline and the sample paper that we were just going through. Okay, here's the other resource, the Annotated Bibliography outline. It's the same one that has the MLA citation here at the bottom. This is just giving you those questions to consider for everything that you're putting into your paper, right? So you've got your introduction. After that, we get into the rubric discussion. And for each of those categories, we go author. What do you mean by an author? Why is that important in establishing the credibility of a source? What are the qualities of an author that scores a 6? What are the qualities of one that scores a 1? Same thing for publisher. What is a publisher? Why is that important to consider? Sources. What do you mean by sources? Why are they important? Timeliness. How do we know an article is timely? Why is that important? Bias. What's bias? What is poor bias? What's an example? I put this note in here. Don't use your sources as the evidence for this section, right? We're not talking about the sources until we get to the source annotations. Now this I color-coded because I put another example below. So your source annotations should read just like this one that we see right here. It's a little bit shorter. I'm asking for a little more length, word count wise from your guys's, but at least the structure of it should follow this precisely. And again, that's the citation of the article. We see that right here. Going to the green coded section, a paragraph length objective summary for the source. Main argument, 3 to 5, most important specific insights. Don't overuse those direct quotes. That same thing that we said about Wikipedia, don't overuse those direct quotes. Third, evaluate for author, publisher, each of our 5 criteria. What did you score it? Why did you choose that score? Use evidence to support your claims. You might have to look up a few of these things. To know who that author is, you might have to do a little Google search for them to know what their background is, what their publication is. You might have to do a little Google search to know a little bit more about this publisher, what this publication, their history is. Include that in there. And then give me a final evaluation. Out of 30, what did you score this? Make a final judgment on it. And then the discussion section, the 3 things to consider for this. Why is this important or relevant to your project? How does it tie into your original arguments? Connect it back to the local issue, because I know that you're going to find research that doesn't really have anything to do specifically with your hometown or with Oakton. And that's okay. That's by design. But then relate it back to localize it. Why does this study or report, what does this study or report detail that can be applied to the community you're examining? And then finally, what content can you pull from this source that you will use in your paper? Get specific. I take points away from those folks that aren't specific. They're just saying, oh, this is a great article, and I can use some of the stuff from this. I'm going to take points away from it. That's how you lose points. Give me a conclusion. Note, don't color code this. I did it just for your sake. So just try to better organize this. Your ink should always just be black ink. Black ink. Don't color code it. Do not color code it. Don't get confused about that. I shouldn't see purple text and red text, all this other shit. I did this just for you. Then we have this MLA citation helper at the bottom. In addition to that, at the very bottom, we have how to find academic journal publications on the Oakton Library website. So a super quick demonstration, and then I'll sign off. You can click this, or you can just search the Oakton Library page, and it'll look just like this. We then need to scroll down. We scroll down to this search bar. It's a very tiny search bar. My other colleges that I teach at have a much larger search bar. It's the most prominent thing on the page, right there when you click on it. This is a very little one. I don't know why. Click this, and then you're going to search your topic. Now, I need us to understand that this is not as intuitive as a Google search, right? So I can't put my whole question in here and then get like some AI thing that's going to give me my answer and tell me exactly where I need to look. This takes some trial and error. And it starts with trying to figure out, okay, how do I sort of categorize my my project, right? If I were to summarize it in a few words, how could I do that? And so if I am doing something on college students' mental health, then the first thing I want to start with is mental health. You see, I've done this exercise many times before. So we search mental health. Next, it's going to prompt me to sign in. So make sure you're signed in. Sign in, Oakland College users. If you've never done this before, just sign in using their same credentials as those on you use to log into D2L and I guess your email. Eventually, it'll take you back here. Okay, so what we want to do is go down to the drop-down menu, right? And we change this from Oakton's whole website to everything. We want to search everything, and you'll see why. A moment ago, it was 9,000 results. Now it's 1.2 million results for mental health. When it's just under the OWL library thing, all it's doing is searching what's physically in our library at Des Plaines. Okay, and we see now we have a lot of results. We want to start refining these things. So after we set the drop down to everything, we're going to go to the left-hand side. This is where we can tweak our results. This is where the filter is. First, make sure everything that it's showing us is just available online. We don't care about physical media, what's present in person. That's fine. Still a ton of results, 1.1 million. The next thing that we want to do that's written on here is we want to change the types of sources on the left-hand side to articles. So scroll down to where you see types of sources. Click that. Now click articles. These now are what we're looking for. Now we have accessed academic articles from scholarly journals. Scholarly articles from academic journals. That's what we have been searching for. So all of these are individual articles that are somehow related to this idea of mental health. You know, you'll scroll through, try to find ones that are relevant to you, but it's very likely that that first initial search term isn't going to suffice. It's either still too much to look through or it's way too specific. So I'm going to offer what's known as a Boolean term. And a Boolean term could be the word and, or on your keyboard, the plus sign. And what the Boolean term does is it indicates to the search bar, hey, look for everything related to this topic and whatever else I include, the next search term I include. What search term do we want to use? Well, I always suggest this. Think in terms of who, affected networks of people. Think in terms of where this is happening. Okay? You could even search in terms of when. But we'll start with the who. So if I want to say that we need to fix the mental health resources that we offer our Oakton College students, then I'll search mental health plus college students. Great. So we're here. Every time you search something new, you got to go back and tweak the results. Unfortunately, that's annoying, but yes, I told you this is not Google. But we see that now has knocked down our results from 700K to a shade under 300,000. I could keep doing this, right? I could search mental health plus college students plus United States, right? If that's what I'm looking for, if I just want to comp it to other studies that are done in the U.S., because colleges in different countries have their own cultures and their own laws that are separate from ours and their own, they're unique to their area, then I could do that. And now we're down to 100,000. So you would go through here, right? Let's just click this one. And these are scholarly articles. Sometimes it'll say download PDF. I could just click that. Other times, like we're seeing here, I got to click this next thing. I go to the next page and I see full text availability, right? So you want to click one of those links to hopefully get one that works. Sometimes the links are broken. Sometimes, the website is outdated. Understand that part of your tuition money, part of the fees that you pay to be here at the college go towards this. They go towards financing scholarly subscriptions, because all of this stuff would be super expensive on its own. It'd be like $40 a pop, $40 an article to access one of these, which is ridiculous. But it's just like Netflix, it's a streaming service essentially for scholarly work. So this is a scholarly article, right? We have an abstract at the top of the page, introduction, blah, blah, blah. You need to find 3 of these for the annotated bibliography, 5 for the final paper when we get to that point. But that's my quick spiel on how to access the library databases. We'll continue talking about this next week. Again, right now, I know that you guys are all in the throes of the Wikipedia project. You've got plenty of stuff to do this week with the proposal. That's where we need to begin before you even think about the research. And the collaboration report, which again are both due Sunday night. Reach out to me. I've been getting more people. I know I said in the last video the other day that I wasn't getting any folks reaching out. I have since then. So reach out if you do have questions. Keep up with your group. All right? I'm getting folks emailing me and they don't know where their group is at. Okay, you are it's your responsibility to keep up. This is a group project. I understand that it's difficult. I understand that this is a challenging class. This is a challenging semester. Doing a 102 course in 8 weeks, that's tough to do. So you guys, you really signed up to be worked this semester. So, but that's okay. I'm here to answer questions. I'm here to help us along in this process. Do not fret. We will make it through. But we just got to go one step at a time, okay? So I'm going to end it here and post this. Next week, we're going to continue talking about secondary research. We're going to bring primary research into the fold. Reach out if you guys have questions. Bye-bye.